Hi, everyone. Welcome to Biblical BookTube. I am your host, Sam Tompkins. Here at Biblical BookTube, I have the privilege of pointing you to good Christian books that will help you grow in Christ. And today, I'm going to review one of my favorite books, probably of all time, and that is The Prodigal God by Tim Keller. This is a fantastic book. So good. One of my favorites, like I said. And Tim Keller is a fantastic author. He's written a lot of books by now. I've lost count, honestly, of how many books he's written. He was a pastor at Redeemer Presbyterian Church in Manhattan. And so he really has his thumb on our culture, I think. He's been called the modern C.S. Lewis. He probably is not very comfortable with, being called that, since C.S. Lewis is one of his heroes, but he truly is. He's a fantastic author. And so this book, The Prodigal God, it struck me. I picked up this book maybe, 10, 11 years ago, and the title really caught me off guard. So I grew up in the church, and I heard Luke 15 preached a lot, which is the parable of the prodigal son, right? And so to see this book called The Prodigal God, I was like, this is strange. Never heard of Tim Keller before. What's going on? So I was intrigued by the title, and I ended up purchasing it, and I'm so glad I did. It's fantastic. So Prodigal God, what Tim Keller does off the bat, thankfully, is he clarifies what he means when he says prodigal God. So he goes back to that dictionary definition, which prodigal means being recklessly spendthrift. And so there's an argument that is made in the book that God is the one who's actually recklessly spendthrift with the grace that he lavishes upon his people. And so he's really getting into the meat of this text. He's going into the cultural backgrounds and the significance of Luke 15, and which I think we're all familiar with the story, but let me just talk about it real quickly. So in Luke 15, you have Jesus and the disciples. They're sitting there, let's just say, and there is two groups of people, okay? You have over here, there's the tax collectors and the sinners, right? These are, drunkards and all that. On the other hand, you also have Pharisees and teachers of the law. And so in Luke 15, we have these two groups of people. And so Jesus starts telling parables as he does. And this text, he's talking about how there's a father who had two sons. There's an older brother and there's a younger brother. So again, growing up in church, you hear all the time about how there's this younger brother and he goes off to a far distant land. He spends all his money, et cetera, and then the father welcomes us back. And that's great, fantastic, but it misses kind of the thrust of the text. It totally ignores one of the main characters in the story, which is the older brother. So let's just talk about Luke 15 one more time. So we have this younger brother goes to his father and says, "Dad, I wish you were dead because I want money. I want it now." And essentially is what he's saying. And the father actually gives him his inheritance early. He says, "Okay, son, if that's what you want, here you go." And the younger son goes off to a far distant land. He, spends it all on himself and living his own selfish lifestyle. Self-fulfillment, self-gratification is his ultimate aim, right? What happens? A famine strikes the land, and he ends up going to a farm where he's working with pigs. He's feeding pigs pig slop. He's probably eating it himself, right? And he has an epiphany. He is literally in the lowest of lows that a Jewish hearer of that day, if someone's working with pigs, they're practically an apostate because you couldn't eat bacon back then. You could not have anything to do with pigs, okay? It was not kosher. So here's this younger brother with the pigs, and he has an epiphany. You know what? The servants in my father's house have food, shelter, clothing. What am I doing hanging out with pigs? I should probably go back to my dad and see if I can work for him, right? As a servant, as a slave. And so he goes back to his dad's house, and what happens? We're pretty familiar with the story. The father sees his son, and he runs to him, which Jewish patriarch fathers, they don't run. So that's a pretty big thing to hear Jesus say. So he runs to his son, and what happens? He embraces his son. The son's trying to make excuses like, hey, I'm going to work for you. I'm going to do this. The father doesn't want to hear any of that. He just bear hugs him. Bear hugs him. I imagine there's tears, there's rejoicing in the father, and he calls to his servants, hey, bring my son new clothes. Look at him. He's tattered. He stinks. We need to give this guy a bath. Give him new clothes. Put a ring on his hand. My son who was lost has been found. He's returned. And go get the fattened calf. We're going to kill it. We're going to have a feast. So they do that. There's this feast. It's fantastic. The younger son is home. And that's usually where, when I grew up, that's usually where the story stopped. But what happens is the father leaves the feast, and we find that other character in the story, the older brother. The father's like, why aren't you celebrating? Your son who was lost has been found. Well, the older brother's sulky, he's upset, he's irritated, and what happens? Basically, the father calls him out and says, hey, you need to come into this feast. No, the older brother doesn't want anything to do with that. He actually says, you know what? You never gave me anything, Dad. I worked hard for you. You didn't give me a goat that I could celebrate with my friends for a feast. You gave me nothing. This is ridiculous. And that's huge because if you look at Luke 15's context with what Tim Keller does here in this book, in the first half of the chapters, we have some other parables, okay? You have a parable of, I can't remember which one is first, but you have the lost sheep, right, where the shepherd goes and finds that lost sheep, right? There's, he leaves the 99 to go get the one. And then there's the parable of the lost coin where the woman is looking for this coin all night. She finds it, she celebrates. So in both of those stories, we have something that's lost, but we have someone who's searching for that which was lost. In this story, that doesn't happen. In this story, you have a lost son. No one goes looking for that son. And what Tim Keller argues is that Jesus is our true elder brother who goes into the far distant country to find the lost younger son and bring him back to the father. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's fantastic the way that Tim Keller describes this parable. In fact, I think that if any pastor who's been preaching this text has probably read this book and maybe ripped off of it some, but it's great. So please, if you haven't read this book, buy it, get it. We're going to have a link to it in the description below. If you have read this book, leave a comment. Let me know what your thoughts were on this book. Maybe there's another book out there that does even better with this text in Luke 15. I'd like to hear about that, if so. And if you're watching this video, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel. We're going to be producing this kind of content, and we would love your support, love you to stick around for the conversations that we're going to have. So thank you for your time today. Have a good one. Take care.